Peace is at hand. Just imagine hearing those words. That's what Henry Kissinger told the White House press corps on October 26, 1972. A powerful, hopeful declaration, right? But here's the twist. A mere 48 hours later, American B-52s unleashed 40,000 tons of bombs on North Vietnam in what became the biggest single raid of the entire war. Same man, same week, two utterly opposite messages. It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How do you reconcile the public face of diplomacy, the promise of peace, with the secret, brutal reality of total war? Today, we're going to peel back the layers. Following the paper trail, the soaring speeches, the clandestine back-channel cables, the private smirks, and the public tears. By the time we're done, you'll understand exactly why the address that was supposedly meant to end America's most divisive conflict actually stretched it out for another 3 bloody, agonizing months. It's a masterclass in contradiction, and it's still echoing today. Picture the scene. Kissinger steps to the podium, his glasses perhaps slightly fogged, his voice measured and calm. "We believe that peace is at hand," he announces. The words hang in the air, electric. News networks instantly cut into their regular programming. Headlines scream about light at the end of the tunnel. For a war-weary American public, desperate for an exit, every single syllable is a lifeline. They latch onto it, hungry for relief. What they couldn't possibly know, what was carefully shielded from public view, was the single-page top-secret sensitive memo sitting on his desk that very morning. That memo wasn't about peace. It was an order for the biggest escalation of the air war since Operation Linebacker Eye. The speech itself lasts a mere 7 minutes, a carefully crafted performance designed to soothe and reassure. Yet, the bombing list attached to that memo, it ran 297 targets long, a chilling blueprint for destruction. Public optimism, private escalation, it was classic Kissinger. He wasn't exactly lying, not in the traditional sense. He was managing contradictions, juggling multiple realities with the skill of a seasoned performer. The question then wasn't if a plate would drop, but which plate would hit the ground first and who would pay the price. Let's rewind a bit. When Richard Nixon took office in January 1969, the Vietnam War was a gaping wound. There were still 540,000 American troops mired in the conflict, and casualties were topping 200 a week, a grim, relentless toll. Kissinger, the brand new national security advisor, walked into an inherited mess. The Paris peace talks, which had been limping along for months, were going absolutely nowhere. The public clamored for an end to the war, but the political imperative was clear. America couldn't be seen to lose. Publicly, Nixon and Kissinger promised peace with honor, a phrase designed to evoke strength and integrity. Privately, however, Kissinger was brutally pragmatic, telling his aides, "We need a plan that gets us out without looking like we lost." The translation was simple: find an exit, but ensure America saves face, even if it meant prolonging the agony. To achieve this delicate balance, Kissinger believed he needed leverage. And in his calculus, Leverage meant a combination of bombs and back channels. So, while the podium speeches spoke of de-escalation and troop withdrawals, one of his very first orders was for a fresh, detailed intelligence map of Cambodia's eastern border. The seeds of a secret war, hidden from Congress and the American people, were planted on day one, a quiet but profound signal of the dual strategy to come. This period saw the full development of Kissinger's audacious toe-track strategy, or perhaps 3 tracks if you count the bombing. Track A was the public face, the one everyone saw. Vietnamization, the gradual withdrawal of American troops, and upbeat press conferences painting a picture of progress. This was the narrative of a responsible superpower gracefully disengaging. But then there was Track B, the hidden one, conducted in the shadows. This involved secret meetings in a modest Paris suburb. Far from the glare of cameras and reporters with North Vietnam's chief negotiator. Le Duc, though. No flags, no press, just a rusty table, endless pots of Vietnamese coffee, and hours of grueling, often frustrating negotiations. These were the talks where Kissinger began to explore the possibility of a ceasefire in place, a significant shift in U.S. negotiating positions. And then, running chillingly parallel to both was Track C, the relentless, clandestine bombing of Cambodia and later Laos. This was a brutal campaign, hidden from Congress and the American public, causing immense devastation and destabilizing entire regions. Every time Kissinger publicly hailed significant progress in the peace talks, the Air Force simultaneously ramped up sorties over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the vital supply route for North Vietnamese forces. This wasn't some accidental oversight, okay? It was a deliberate, strategic contradiction. Kissinger's theory was starkly simple. Make Hanoi fear they were about to be utterly smashed by overwhelming military force, while simultaneously offering them a diplomatic ladder to climb down from the conflict. Call it the good cop, bad cop routine. Except here, both cops were the same guy, just wearing different masks for different audiences. He aimed to bludgeon them into submission while simultaneously enticing them to the negotiating table. A high-stakes gamble that had immense human consequences. By the autumn of 1972, both sides were utterly exhausted. The weariness of a protracted conflict had settled heavy on Washington and Hanoi alike. It was in this atmosphere that Kissinger dropped his famous phrase, "Peace is at hand." This came after a significant, albeit fragile, breakthrough. Hanoi had finally accepted a ceasefire in place, a key demand Washington had insisted upon for 4 agonizing years. The proposal also included the establishment of a Council of National Reconciliation to govern post-ceasefire, a concession that some U.S. staff felt was too generous. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the end was truly in sight. Peace, as it often does, proved elusive. Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, had been largely left out of the loop during these crucial secret negotiations. When news of the proposed terms filtered through, President Nguyen Van Thieu and his government erupted in fury. They saw the agreement as a betrayal, fearing it would leave them vulnerable to the North. Nixon knew he needed Thieu on board, or the entire delicate deal would collapse. So, Kissinger flew to Saigon, publicly praising Through's courage and steadfastness, all while privately delivering thinly veiled threats to cut off all U.S. aid if the South Vietnamese president continued to stall. Meanwhile, back in Washington, to demonstrate America's resolve and to pressure both Hanoi and Saigon, Nixon ordered Operation Linebacker to what became infamously known as the Christmas bombing. The world watched in horror as B-52s plastered Hanoi and Hapong with bombs. Kissinger, ever the master of narrative control, told the press that the raids were designed to bring the negotiations to a swift conclusion. Same man, same week, two opposite messages yet again. The bombing eventually halted. The accord was initialed on January 23, 1973. American POWs finally came home to cheering families. And Kissinger, for his efforts, would controversially pocket the Nobel Peace Prize. Saigon, however, was effectively given a mere 150 days to survive on its own, a ticking clock that few truly believed they could outlast. The Paris Peace Accords, signed in 1973, were a document of immense complexity and profound compromise. Perhaps the most astonishing concession one Kissinger had publicly ruled out for years was the allowance for North Vietnamese troops to remain inside South Vietnam. For Saigon, this wasn't a peace agreement. It was a death warrant, an act of sheer betrayal. Anti-war congressmen in the U.S., on the other hand, argued it was simply overdue realism, a necessary evil to finally extract America from the quagmire. The agreement also optimistically created a Council of National Reconciliation, an entity that predictably never managed to reconcile anybody. It was a diplomatic fiction, a paper solution to a deeply entrenched political and ideological conflict. Within 2 short years, with U.S. aid to South Vietnam throttled by a war-weary Congress and no American bombers left overhead to provide air cover, Saigon's defenses folded like wet cardboard. The North Vietnamese offensive of 1975 swept through, encountering little meaningful resistance. Kissinger later claimed that the Accords had achieved their real, primary goal to extricate America from the war. And from a purely American perspective, he had a point. U.S. troops were out, POWs were home. But critics countered, quite powerfully, that you don't declare victory in a marathon simply because you handed the baton to someone else right before the finish line, especially when that someone else was destined to collapse. The fine print, the compromises, and the ultimate outcome painted a far more complex and tragic picture than the initial pronouncements of peace with honor had suggested. The announcement that Henry Kissinger and Le Duc, though were to be jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973 for their work on the Paris Peace Accords, immediately ignited a firestorm of controversy. Le Duc, though, in an unprecedented move, flat out refused the prize, citing the USS' ongoing violation of the Accords, particularly the continued bombing in Cambodia and Laos, and the lack of true peace in Vietnam. His refusal was a damning indictment of the agreement's efficacy and the nature of the peace it supposedly brought. The outrage wasn't confined to Vietnam. 2 American members of the Nobel Committee resigned in protest. unable to reconcile the award with the continuing violence and the moral ambiguities of Kissinger's role. Kissinger, ever adept at managing public perception, initially offered to donate his prize money to a scholarship fund for fallen airmen's children. A noble gesture, perhaps. But the fund, perhaps sensing the deep controversy surrounding the award, quietly declined the cash, leaving Kissinger to shelve the plan. Publicly, he maintained a statesman-like demeanor, calling the prize a tribute to the art of negotiation, framing it as a recognition of diplomatic achievement. Privately, however, to his closest friends, he confessed it was the most embarrassing honor I've ever received. This stark contrast once again revealed the two voices, the two personas of one man, the public diplomat seeking accolades, and the private individual grappling with the immense, often bloody, consequences of his realpolitik. The prize, meant to signify peace, became instead a symbol of the deeply conflicted legacy of the Vietnam War. The ink on the Paris Peace Accords was barely dry before the dominoes began to fall across Indochina. By 1975, the region was consumed by further tragedy. Cambodia, destabilized by years of secret American bombing and internal conflict, succumbed to the horrific Khmer Rouge regime, ushering in a period of unimaginable genocide. Laos, too, tipped into communist control. And then came the iconic, heartbreaking image, Saigon's last helicopter lifting off the embassy roof. A desperate final act as North Vietnamese forces swept into the city. The war for America was over, but for Indochina, the nightmare continued. The blame game began almost immediately. Kissinger, with characteristic defiance, blamed Congress for cutting aid to South Vietnam, arguing that without continued American support, the accords were destined to fail. Congress, in turn, blamed Kissinger for negotiating a flawed deal, one that fundamentally failed to secure the South's long-term survival. Meanwhile, the devastating, secret bombing of Cambodia, initiated years earlier, left behind a cratered, scarred landscape and a deeply traumatized population. This destabilization, many historians argue, inadvertently fueled the rise of radical movements like the Khmer Rouge, contributing to years of unspeakable atrocities. Whether you ultimately see Kissinger as a shrewd realist navigating an impossible geopolitical landscape, or as a war criminal indifferent to the immense human cost, often depends on which set of numbers you choose to count. The 58,000 American names etched onto a granite wall, or the upwards of 2 million Indochinese dead, a silent testament to a conflict that raged far beyond America's withdrawal. Fast forward to any modern conflict, any complex geopolitical crisis, and you'll inevitably hear echoes of Kissinger's playbook. It's a recurring pattern: announce progress and de-escalation while simultaneously expanding covert action. Bomb first, then negotiate from a position of perceived strength. Claim exit as success, regardless of the aftermath for those left behind. Understanding Henry Kissinger's Vietnam address isn't just about ancient history. It's a vital user manual for how statesmanship can be presented as peace, yet feel undeniably like war, all at the exact same moment. His methods continue to influence foreign policy, shaping how nations engage in conflict, manage public perception, and navigate the treacherous waters of international diplomacy. The lessons from that period about transparency, accountability, and the true cost of peace with honor remain profoundly relevant today. If this story of two-faced diplomacy and its devastating impact has rattled your assumptions, then you're in the right place. Hit subscribe for more videos that pull back the curtain on official stories and challenge conventional narratives. Want to know how the CIA managed to sell the secret bombing campaigns to a largely unwitting Congress? The next video autoplays in 10 seconds. Stick around, because the rabbit hole goes even deeper. Henry Kissinger's Vietnam address promised America a clear exit and an honorable peace. What it ultimately delivered, however, was a withdrawal for Washington, a tragic ruin for Indochina, and a masterclass in the perilous art of saying one thing while meticulously doing another. The lesson here isn't that diplomacy is useless. Far from it. It's that when words and weapons are allowed to travel on parallel, contradictory tracks, the people on the ground, the civilians, the soldiers, the families, are the ones who ultimately pay the steepest ticket. So, the next time a leader tells you peace is at hand, or that a conflict is winding down, take a moment, pause, and then ask yourself what precisely is happening in the skies overhead. Because sometimes, the loudest pronouncements of peace are merely a smokescreen for the quiet escalation of war.